Today I'll be discussing compulsory voting and why it's essential to a strong and equal democracy. What is compulsory voting? Compulsory voting is the practice of penalizing citizens who consistently choose not to exercise their right to vote. This fine can come in many different forms. It more than likely would come as a fine, but some countries that practice compulsory voting, their penalty comes in the form of disenfranchisement. In the 2020 presidential election, the United States saw some of the highest voter turnout it's seen in many, many years. But it's still not enough, which is where compulsory voting comes into play. Some of the benefits of compulsory voting is a higher voter turnout. A higher voter turnout is very beneficial because it is overall a better representation of the citizens of a nation, whereas a low voter turnout can inaccurately represent the needs of a country, especially because there are many people that face barriers in regards to political participation. Another benefit of compulsory voting is that the general public would have to become more involved and more educated on politics. This is very beneficial because many people choose not to vote because they simply don't know anything and they don't know where to educate themselves. They don't know how to. So if voting is required, they would have no choice but to educate themselves on the topic, which would, again, make it more of a legitimate government. Speaking of a legitimate government, that is another benefit. Decisions made by higher amounts of the population makes the government more legitimate. If less than half the country is not voting in an election, that isn't the voice of the people. That's the voice of less than half the country. And most needs are not going to be met because they didn't vote. And another benefit of compulsory voting is the campaigns can focus more on educating and their issues at hand. Many campaigns, while still trying to educate and address their issues and voice what they want to do for the country, spend a lot of time trying to increase voter turnout. If voting is required, they can focus more on educating and bringing their issues to the people so people can make educated decisions rather than just coming out and choosing whoever or not voting. There are very few countries in the world that practice compulsory voting, but they have seen a lot of benefits. One of the most prominent countries that uses compulsory voting is Australia. They've had compulsory voting in their democracy for almost a century now. A quote from Strangio says that they've averaged 70% turnout. Australia saw participation rise from 60% to 91% after implementing compulsory voting. In Australia, when it is election season and when they're ready to vote, they have a very strong voting culture that encourages voters to participate. They have what's called a election sausage. So they go vote and then they go get their election sausage and they have a cookout with everyone, and it makes it feel a lot more unified and everyone's a lot happier to be doing it. And it doesn't seem like, oh, I have to go vote today. It doesn't seem like a chore. It seems like something to look forward to. A study that was done said that compulsory voting does not result in any electoral advantage for any specific political party. And that was a study done by Strangio. This is an issue that people that are against compulsory voting may see. They don't want to see an advantage or a change in the way that the parties are, the Republican and Democratic parties, or whatever it may be for the country. They don't want to see an advantage in one of those parties. But after studies in countries that do implement compulsory voting, this is not the case. Here I am going to be showing a graph. This graphic shows the countries that have compulsory voting, the countries that do not have compulsory voting, and the countries that don't have any elections. As you can see on this graphic, only 13% of countries implement compulsory voting, while 85% do not. So what does this mean? Like, what does the numbers show? We have to prove something here. If you look down further, the graphic also shows that countries with compulsory voting have a 7.37% higher voter turnout, which is very significant. And especially since it's such a small number, if we saw some of that 85% that does not implement compulsory voting, we could see a huge change in voter turnout across the world. There are many arguments against compulsory voting, and one of them is that compulsory voting illegitimizes the idea of a free democracy because you are requiring people to go vote. While technically speaking, that's true because you're making it less of a right, more of a requirement. It's also implementing them, giving them the right to choose and giving them kind of an incentive to choose. And that's why I believe that what Australia does with their compulsory voting, by kind of offering like some sort of an incentive with the voting, can help increase voter turnout. And I also know that, not that this is compulsory voting, I know that there are places, especially in this area with my previous experience, if you voted, they would give you something for free. Or in like local restaurants and things of that nature. That is a good way to promote voting, but for the government as a whole to make voting completely required would make it even more, again, increase the voter turnout and make things a lot more equal. A study done by a law student at University of Pennsylvania said that the United States could see a similar increase in democratic participation, along with a decrease in inequality and moderation of the nation's overall political atmosphere. This is a very good summary of what could happen if compulsory voting is implemented. Inequality is a huge, huge issue in our country, and I believe that if compulsory voting was implemented, we could see a lot of changes in terms of we have people that are serving us that are fulfilling the needs of what we want, and fulfilling the needs, especially the minorities and everyone across the country that struggles every day. Overall, compulsory voting is an extremely beneficial way to encourage and ensure voting in a country. It increases democracy, promotes equality, and voices the needs for all citizens. Thank you.